I mean, come on, Gary. We all do sometimes dumb things for a story. The one thing that is hard for me is the fact that when someone takes a life, they don't just take one life. They take so many lives. And the first one who got a chance of parole was my guy, Bobby Bostic. And a year later, he walked out, and I could not believe it.
The I Catch Killers podcast was a fresh start for me, as I left policing behind and started a new life. Over the years, we've laughed together, cried, and shared some powerful moments. Welcome to I Catch Killers. Welcome back to part 2 of my chat with highly regarded American journalist Erin Moriarty. And part 2, just like part 1, we're going to talk all things crime. But I just want to say something to you first up, Erin. And in the research, I thought this was pretty extreme. I've done a lot of things to crack cases and get stories and everything else. But what's the go with giving the BTK Killer your home address?
Okay,
talk us through that. Explain.
I know, one of the dumber things. I knew you'd probably bring that up.
Explain who this is so we understand how ridiculous what you did.
Well, it was ridiculous. I'm going to admit it. So the BTK Killer, he got that name for a long time. It was Wichita, Kansas, the Midwest, a place where most people thought, it's a small town and safe. And somebody was, actually, he called himself that in a letter. He would send letters to newspapers, and it was the bind them, torture, and kill serial killer.
That's creepy.
Yeah, it was creepy. And I took, he was really out there for almost 30 years. Then he made a mistake and he was caught, and he's a man by the name of Dennis Rader. And he was in jail. And of course, like every other journalist, I wanted to be the first to get an interview with him. And he would see me in jail. So I did talk with him in jail, but I wasn't allowed to bring in a camera there. And so, I was working to try to get him to either at the courthouse, maybe sit down and do an interview with me. And if not, something short of that, when I did my piece, I wanted some of his artwork. As you probably know, Gary, a lot of these guys in prison become artists.
Yeah.
And Dennis Rader fancied himself as a cartoonist. And so he had all these little animal cartoons, and I wanted some. And he said I could have them if I gave him my home address, if I gave him where to send them. He didn't want to send it to the office. Now, in my mind, I wasn't thinking, okay, so I'm not even going to say I was thinking, but in my mind, I live in New York. I have doormen, and he's never going to get out. And what is the chance? What I didn't realize is that my son would see the letter from him and see the little drawings on the envelope, and Dennis Rader, Wichita, Kansas, the prison, Erin Moriarty, and put my address there. And he said, tell me you didn't do what I think you did. And I was like, honey, we have doormen. Nobody's going to get past the doormen. Anyway, that has been a long, contentious issue between my son and I, but it was stupid. However, I did use the drawings in my piece, and I would never do that again. I mean, come on, Gary. We all do sometimes dumb things for a story.
I know.
That was one of the dumber things.
The name that he's given himself, BTK, that would have scared me to start with. So that's
he was.
Yeah,
he was scary. And you and I both have dealt with the scariest serial killer. Unfortunately, he would not talk to me, but I saw his interview with a FBI agent who afterwards told me this was the scariest killer he had ever encountered. Was a 15-year-old boy who was diagnosed as a psychopath. Psychopath, and wanted to kill. He was a very bright young man, wanted to kill just to know what it felt like. So he was practicing to be a serial killer, and he, in his mind, he would take a couple, an elderly couple, because who would care in his mind, and just see what it felt like to kill. And then in the interview with the FBI agent, I don't know if I ever would have thought to ask this question, but the FBI agent said the young man's name, he's now in his early 20s, is Daniel Marsh. And the FBI agent said, how would you kill me? And Daniel just like looked around the room and started thinking. He goes, you know what I think I'd do? He goes, I'd try to break glass because that would make a really good weapon and I would cut you up.
Wow.
I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was the scariest. And he would have. And California, right after he was convicted, California changed the laws and it became illegal to charge anyone under the age of 15 or 16. I'm pretty sure in California cannot charge as adults. Adult automatically. You know, you have to go through hearings. And he tried to he had been charged as an adult right away.
Right.
So he tried to appeal his case. And we were all really scared that he might win on appeal and then he would have been out at age 21. But luckily, I mean, common sense
prevails.
Because there are psychopaths out there. And you and I can interview them and we can say we want to see how they tick and we want to know how they think. We can't because true psychopaths do not think the way you and I do. Well, I can speak for myself. I don't know how you think.
Well, if I object to that and say, no, I think like a psychopath, you might have concerns. No, I agree. And sometimes people, I've charged people and people close to the person going, I just didn't see it and that. Well, that's because it's been hidden. But with psychopaths, that I think quite often we try to put a rational mind into a psychopath, like into their actions or why did they do this? Why did they do that? I've been at pains throughout my career and I was taught this, that, don't try to read logic all the time into a crime scene because quite often it's not a rational thought that why they've done this. And you've got to keep your mind open to it, but they're scary. They are scary and potentially they give off. I find they give off, and sometimes I don't know if that's because I already know what they're capable of, but sometimes there's something that just doesn't seem quite right about them as well, the way that they react to certain things. You talk like serial killers over in America. That's something, again, mass shootings and serial killings. It's another thing that the country is recognised for. We don't get as many serial killers over here in Australia. We do have serial killers, but serial killing, it wasn't really sort of talked about up until 30, 40 years ago, where what happened over in America. And John Douglas, Mindhunter, I remember reading his book years and years ago, and I found that very interesting. Why America so many serial killers? And can I just throw up one possible thought? You had so many jurisdictions, like different police forces, and everyone was operating in a silo. So someone could murder someone in this location, then murder a person in another location, and they weren't linked. Did you see that as an issue in America?
Without question. That comes up all the time, but it's also that their victims are individuals who can disappear and people might not report them missing because they don't realize they're missing. They've, left their families. They are missing people, they might be missing for a while. Who's connecting that person to a serial killer?
Yeah.
The woman who, I'm getting to my point really quickly, but the woman who actually identified the Golden State Killer, who is a genetic genealogist, a retired lawyer who was really the one who found the Golden State Killer, identified using that technology. But she was asked before that, she was asked to find the identity of a living doe, a young woman who, she was alive. Yep. No one knew who she really was. She had been left at a RV park in California. Her name was Lisa Jensen. She thought her dad was a guy by the name of Jensen, who turned out to be a serial killer
Right.
Well known through Canada and the United States, named Rasmussen, and he died without ever telling anybody um, what her identity was. And so it took a year for this genetic genealogist, this woman by the name of Barbara Ray Venter. She then went and tried to track down this girl's DNA and finally found. So, this is a young girl who turned up in
Yeah.
California, and it turned out she had been uh, came from New Hampshire. She was the daughter of a young woman who disappeared in the late 1980s, and she had disappeared with a man by the name of Bob Evans, who was, of course, the serial killer
Right.
Rasmussen. So nobody ever connected.
Connected them.
Yeah, that didn't. So I think there might even be more in Australia than we're aware of. But I think that sometimes serial killers, we don't know how many people they've killed because you just can't necessarily connect them all if they've gone across country. And Rasmussen was known for going through Canada and the United States um and
Well,
clearly leaving victims.
yeah, and it's interesting that the victims that they select, as you said, they're people that makes it difficult. One of our most notorious serial killers, Ivan Milat, and he was a backpacker murderer and would be picking up overseas backpackers.
Exactly.
And that was a classic case of them not being linked. There was seven of them, but they're disappearing and over a couple of years, and the links weren't made between the offences, and then it all sort of came together. So it wasn't obvious right at the start. We had another serial killer, the Granny Killer, on the North Shore, and he was murdering elderly ladies in a very close proximity, and it was easy to link the crimes in that one, in that the type of victims, the location, it was very similar. But yeah, I wonder how many serial killers are out there that we just don't know about. I think it is getting harder in that with technology and the communications we have between the different law enforcement agencies, it is harder for them to operate without being detected. I want to speak to you on a cold case, Laura Smither, the young girl, 12-year-old girl who disappeared. It was interesting, and you followed all the way through. Can you tell us about that case?
Well, I can tell you that that case has stayed in my head mainly because she disappeared in April, and my son, she had a birthday 1 month apart from my son, who was also 12 at the time.
Right.
And
Okay,
I'm
that
covering the
resonates.
story of this young girl who just goes for, was a budding ballerina and quite good. And she went for a run in the morning on a rainy day and never came back. And I remember when I first started on it, the name William Reece did come up. He had been in prison earlier in Oklahoma for rapes. And he had been working in Texas, and he would go up and down I-45, and I-35 from Texas home to Oklahoma, which is where he was from, and then he'd come back and work in Texas. His name came up, but there just wasn't anything to connect him. And so the reason why I kept coming back, I mean, really, they didn't get him until the 1990s, no, sorry, 2015,
And
2016, sorry.
the
Yes,
disappearance was in 97, I think. So yeah,
97.
yeah.
And it wasn't until, and then only because they finally found the bodies, because they, kind of gave him not a deal in terms of prison, but they pulled him out of the prison he was in, and they put him in a jail, and they let him out during the day and let him go look for the bodies of his victims. But I stayed on that story because I felt I kind of lived that story, and I knew the parents of all the victims except one. There was one set of parents who I think to this day just don't want to believe that she was a victim of a serial killer. They never did an interview. And from what I understand, they just want to think that she is gone as opposed to dead and murdered.
That's
Um,
interesting. You bring that up, Erin. I've seen that where someone's disappeared, and the family, regardless of the circumstances, entertain a degree of hope that one day they're going to walk in the door and they're going to get yelled at. Where have you been? What have you done? And then it's all back together again. I think people hold out on that hope and don't like getting that that finality of, yeah, this is your child. It takes away their hope.
Well, I think the hardest part for me, if I do talk about the pain of this job day in and day out, the one thing that is hard for me is the fact that when someone takes a life, they don't just take one life. They take so many lives. And that is so true when a child is kidnapped. So then you have that uncertainty while that child's missing. And then if that child's body is found and then the search for the killer, um, those individuals, the family members are never the same.
Yeah.
And you can't be. And I mean, I think that's true with mass shootings as well. And because it's, to me, it's pretty much the same thing, this
Yeah.
horrible taking away of a child's life. And I think that's the hardest thing, is to recognize just the ripple effect of one murder on so many people.
Yeah.
And how these individuals, one day they have a family life, and it's in one day it's over and never ever will be the same.
And to me, just listening to you talk, it's clearly you get it, you understand it. That's what I saw time and time again with homicide. It's not the one life and then life gets on. Lives around them, and the ripple effect is a good way of describing it. It's just, it destroys people. It's just horrendous. And when I feel sorry for the families who have the missing people, that the likelihood they have been murdered. But the families just go through a daily torture, wondering what's happened to their loved one if they don't get the remains back or find out what's happened. It's an ongoing nightmare. And I speak to victims' families where the incident occurred 30 years ago, and the mere mention of it, they'll break down in tears, like they're living it as it's actually happening.
I think because we say, time heals all wounds. That's just not true when you lose a child. There was a case here, and I'm sure you're familiar with it. It's Conrad Roy, a young man who had some depression issues and had one point threatened to take his own life, but he met a young woman who actually encouraged him to take his own life. And I was actually impressed. It was in the state of Massachusetts in the United States. And the prosecutors decided to charge her, even though she was 30 miles away. She was on the phone and by text encouraging him to kill himself. And I interviewed his mother, so many times. And there was never a time that it didn't hurt to interview her, because you could actually feel her pain. You could feel it. You would go to dinner and it was so raw and out there. It hurt at times to sit there knowing you couldn't do anything but maybe have dinner with her, maybe just listen to her. Her pain was like etched on her face. And because, again, guilt and the senselessness of what that young woman did.
Yeah, it's horrific. Another case I want to talk about, wrongful conviction of Ryan Ferguson, because I think that highlights a lot of mistakes that can be made within the system. Can you just give us a run through on that particular case?
Well, that's an interesting one, because when we first heard about Ryan Ferguson, I didn't know one way or the other whether he was innocent or guilty. What I knew was that there was a young man who was in college, and a friend of his who had alcohol issues, 2 years after a murder in town, went to the police, or started telling people, I think I may have killed someone 2 years ago, a sports editor at the local newspaper. Well, when the police brought him in, he didn't know any details, but they looked to see who he was with that night, and he was with Ryan Ferguson. And so Ryan Ferguson gets, the cops show up at where he's in college, and they put him in a room saying, we know you killed this guy. And he's like, no, I didn't. So the reason why I got involved in it was, number one, we called the accuser the dream killer because he said he woke up and he dreamt that he had killed this guy. And the reason why we called him that was there was evidence at the scene. There was blood, there was a handprint
Yeah.
that had never been identified. Neither one of these guys matched any of that evidence. But because one guy said he dreamed it, and then you can actually see on video, the police are interviewing him. Thank God it was on video. And they're saying, so what weapon did you use? And he clearly has no idea. And there's a funny, it's not funny, but it was funny just to look at it.
The irony
They go,
of it.
what weapon did you use? And he goes, a bungee cord. And they said, no, not, it was, a knife.
No.
It was this, so they're telling him what it was.
No.
And they're saying, where did you kill him? And he went, on that alley. No, it was in the parking lot. You see this happen on video. So I
shouldn't be laughing, Erin, but yeah.
You're right. It's unbelievable. So I'm doing a story thinking this guy's never going to be convicted. We have all this great video. This is a great story, but he was convicted. And based on this, so the dream killer took a deal. I tried to reach his parents. They wouldn't talk to me. I talked to the lawyer and I said, why are you letting him take a deal? Look at that video. He doesn't know anything about the murder. Why aren't you, getting help for him and fighting this? No, we wanted to get the first deal here. So we do our first hour on it. And from the beginning, new evidence came out. And 10 years later, in fact, a great defense lawyer saw our story and decided to represent him. And 10 years later, Ryan Ferguson walked out of prison. And that really was eye-opening for me because when I started, I had no idea. He could have done it. All I knew was there was no evidence. I liked the prosecutor and I trusted him until I sat through trial and realized that, he had not, not been quite as he had withheld information from the defense. And so that was eye-opening for me. And just like I stay in touch with victims of crimes, I stay in touch with everyone that I've done a story with that has walked out of prison. Thanksgiving and Christmas, I don't just talk to family. I talk to people who've been wrongfully convicted. They would be hurt if we didn't talk on holidays.
Yeah, Erin, and just the fact that you say that, I think therein lies part of the reason you've been successful in the work that you do, that there's a genuineness about it, because I find that, and now that I've left the police and working in the media, I cringe when I was in the police, when media used to come up to victims and they want the story and they throw everything at them and then just abandon them. And I can almost, I'm with the victims and I can almost see the victims, but I thought they liked me. And I didn't have the heart to say, no, you've just been used because they wanted the story. But then on the flip side, on the positive side, I see journalists like I believe you are, that are genuine in that when you make a connection with the family, that connection continues on. And I think it's so important because they feel like they're being used if they come in. And, you see people, and I saw it when I was in the police because I had a lot of high-profile jobs that were covered in the media, but also seen it outside the media. When the story's coming up, everything's about the victim's family. How do you feel? This and that, and they're fettered over. And then the story goes out, and then they're forgotten about, and they phone the person, and they don't pick the phone up. So it's important what you're doing.
I'm curious, though, Gary. Has your perspective changed in certain ways from this side of it as opposed to when you were a police officer?
My career was defined with a couple of significant things. I sort of swum against the tide to a degree in that I marched on Parliament House with the Indigenous community about different things that didn't hold me in good stead within my own organisation. And I would push things. So I learnt that from some investigations I worked on very early in my career. I was fortunate that I saw the injustice and all that, so I very much became victim orientated. I wasn't cynical about the media when I was in the cops because I saw the media as a tool of the investigation. If I wanted something out there, we're looking for this person or that. The message I'd put out if I was doing a stand-up would, I cringe when I see police stand up and go, we don't know what happened. There's no CCTV, there's no witnesses, no nothing. I'm thinking, you've just told this crook that they've got nothing to worry about. I was always staring down the camera thinking that I'm talking to the suspect because I'm thinking the suspect's going to be, yes, we've got a lot of information. We're following that up and really, eyeballing the suspect through the releases in the media. So I saw it as an important role. Other people didn't. Since I've left the cops and now working in the media, I think there is a lot of power in the media and a lot of good that can be done. Remember Serial, the podcast that came out? I think it was from America. It's called Serial. That was sort of very early in the podcast genre, talking about a particular crime. Over here, we've had one called Teacher's Pet, which put the spotlight on a particular murder where a husband murdered his wife and then moved the young girl in straight after. Because of the attention from the media, that person, I believe, is now convicted. It was 20, 30 years ago. The case has been forgotten about. So my thoughts on the media, I won't say a necessary evil because that's suggesting that there is something wrong with the media. The media have a story to do. I think it's a powerful tool that can be used if it's used properly. So I haven't sort of flipped. I've always had strong views on the media. I used them when I was in the police, and I can see the power of them. But what's your take on media in the criminal justice system?
Well, I think in some cases we're just awful. I always remember Monica Lewinsky, who had not committed any crimes, but who had been involved with a president, and watching the crowds of reporters and cameramen following her. And then I was embarrassed for our profession. That's part of the problem with a free press and competition. But on the other hand, I know that if you do a story about someone who deserves a quick example, a couple of years ago, a young man wrote me. He had been convicted when he was 16. He was guilty of what he did. He had done like a robbery. He had been armed. No one was hurt. He was 16. The judge did not think he was worth saving, and she threw the book at him. She didn't give him life without parole. What she did was she made it worse. She just piled on, sentences. So he would never get parole or even a chance for parole. She gave him 241 years. So he writes me, he's in his 40s, and he's telling me how he's changed his life and how he's gone to school. And he just wants a chance at parole. And would I look at his case? And normally I wouldn't. I was like, but why not? And what really changed is I found the judge who was getting on in years, and she was saying, I now know what he has done with his life, but I can't do anything about it. So I do a story, I interview the judge, I go visit him in prison, and some state representative in Missouri sees the story, puts in a law, and saying that if someone has changed his life, if he's been convicted as a juvenile and he's changed his life after 20 years, he has a chance at parole. So the very first guy who, the law passed, and the first one who got a chance at parole was my guy, Bobby Bostic. And a year later, he walked out, and I could not believe it. Could not believe it.
How cool is that? Like, congratulations. And that's, I think what, showing some humanity in circumstances too is important. But it
was the judge who did it. It was the fact the judge was willing to talk, because that's what stayed in everybody's mind.
Yeah.
But just the idea that, and he's doing okay. He's been out now 2 years. He's still doing okay, because I check on him. I'm a little worried, but he's doing okay.
Well, that's good. I recently got an opportunity to spend a couple of weeks in a maximum security prison, and you could imagine how popular I would be in there. But it was
it'd be a little scary.
Yeah, it had a few moments. But they're trying a different way of running the prisons, where I consider it progressive. It's not dissimilar to what the Scandinavian models of prisons are, where it's more of a community. They're teaching people skills in there and educating them, getting them more functional. So when they're released, when those big gates are open, they integrate back into society more. And there were some people in there, and I don't consider myself sort of a bleeding heart or naive. I know a bad guy when I see a bad guy. But I sat down with some of the inmates in there, and they're saying, "Look, I did the wrong thing. I was dealing drugs. I got addicted to drugs, and I started dealing drugs. The usual, pattern that goes on. I'm 45. I'm embarrassed that I'm in jail. I've still got another 6 years to serve. It's not going to. There is no way that I'm going back to this world. I'm just wasting my time sitting here. If I'm out, I've learnt my lesson, and this is this new modelling of prison." I would be confident enough with this particular person to sign his papers if I had the authority and say, yeah, get him back out in the society. He can contribute to society. And I cringe when you hear, you're talking someone gets 241 years. That's just madness. But I think we've got to think outside the square to fight crime, and the way that they're doing trialing this model of prison, I think it's probably a way to go. So,
Well, and you're right. I think you're hitting on it too. Drugs and youth.
yeah.
That's a very bad combination, and contributes to a lot of the the individuals who are in prison, and then they age there, and that's all they know. So even they can't get out and lead a life unless they get a lot of support.
Yeah, definitely. Even and talking about coming into the media from the police. When I first started doing this podcast a couple of years ago, the proposal was put to me about I catch killers, get ex-detectives in and talk about cases that you solved, which we did for the first season. But I sort of thought, well, we're getting one side of the story. Like, we need the other side of the story. We need all the players involved. And we've had so many bad guys on here. I think we've probably had more bad guys than we've had cops on. But I think everyone's learning. You're learning that it's not always black and white, the world of crime, and you've delved into your wrongful convictions, but you've also recognised good police work. I think it's such a complex world.
No question, no question. And I actually like doing both stories. I think it's really important for me to do wrongful convictions, and not just, to explain this particular person's situation, but to explain exactly how that person and what failed that allowed that person to end up in prison when they're innocent. And yet, on the other hand, give me a really good investigation, cops who are really doing their job and trying to use all the good techniques, and trying to do it for the right reason, to bring some kind of peace to the victim's family. I'm first one in line for that. I want the system to work. Unfortunately, as we were talking about just a few minutes ago, there are psychopaths out there. They need to be put away. There are people who are dangerous. There are people who will kill their wives or husbands simply because they don't want to pay child support or alimony, or they have a new girlfriend, boyfriend.
Yeah.
That's not right. But on the other hand, you don't want to put the wrong person in prison. So just give me either one of those stories, and I'm a happy camper.
Yeah, but take on board what you're saying. I fully agree with it, that you got to show it from both sides. Otherwise, because in policing, and I say this, and I'm not dirty on the police just because of the way I've left. I love the police. I enjoy it. It's an honourable profession if you do it right. But power can corrupt, and not just police. Power can corrupt the courts. You talk about a prosecutor, you look at the prosecutors, egos come into it. This is a high-profile case. That's not going to help our case. We push that aside. I'm just talking in a general sense. You've got to check yourself time and time again with the power that you've got as a police officer. And I think that's where it can go off track sometimes. We had a lot of inquiries over here, I know in America, where police corruption and royal commissions would come through, parliamentary inquiries, and clean it up. And I know you've experienced that over in America. I was in major crime when we had a royal commission go through. We're a better place after the Royal Commission's gone through and got rid of people. But you need good role models and people with moral integrity to make sure that they don't get corrupted by the power.
No question about it, because it's there are so many talk about rippling effect. If you don't have good police, if you don't have a good police department and you don't have good investigators, then you'll have more crime. It's just, to me, that was a real problem for a while. The investigative group that was supposed to do the Long Island serial killer, they had so many problems within the department that at least 10 years went by when if they the information they had to arrest this man this year, they had back in 2011. Think about that.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, we don't know if he's killed anyone else or even if he is the killer, but the idea that just because of a dysfunctional police department, that a person who we know killed at least 4 women was allowed out that long, when the evidence that brought him in was stuff they knew back then, that's very, very worrisome.
It's concerning, isn't it, that can happen? But when you say that, it doesn't shock me because I've seen it over here time and time again, where there's some attention, media attention, referring it back to the media. All of a sudden, those dusty boxes get pulled out because someone in the media is asking questions, and oh look, there is some evidence there, and we can solve this case. We'll wrap it up at this stage, Erin, but I'm going to put in a request that we get you back at some stage, because I've really enjoyed this chat, and there's so much to talk about. It's just fascinating what you've covered throughout your career. So
I would love it. I would love it. And I'd love to hear more of the cases that you worked on as a police officer and investigator. So I definitely would come back.
okay, well let's line that up sometime in the near future. And congratulations on your work too. I think it's important work, and you've done it with integrity, which is a good thing. So thanks very much for coming on I Catch Killers.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Gary. It's great meeting you.